floor is yours. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Super. Thank you so much for that extremely generous introduction, which will be very difficult to live up to. But delighted to be with you remotely. And let me just ask for the slides perhaps to be shown. Are they up already? Okay. All right. Let's see if this system that we have here works well. Okay. Wonderful. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is the idea of the high quality health system. And in particular, I want to use the example of chronic conditions to illustrate how we might measure and improve health systems to get us closer to the ideal of a high quality system. All right. So the first question I think we should be asking is simply, what do we mean by a high quality health system? So a couple of years ago, I had the distinct honor to lead a large commission of researchers and policymakers from many countries around the world to take a fresh look at health system quality, really take an epidemiologic look almost to ask the question, how is it looking across countries? But before we could look at it across countries, we needed to define what do we mean by quality. And here I specifically, we borrowed, of course, in the definition you see before you on the screen, from huge amounts of work that have gone on before our commission, including coming all the way back to Avidis Donabedian and, of course, Michael Porter and others that you've referenced. I think the distinct contribution that we make in this commission is to really take a systems view as opposed to the view of the individual and the care episode. So we defined high quality health systems as health systems that are for and about people. We specifically noted that they have three features: consistently delivering care that improves or maintains health. So the critical need to measure and know that we're improving outcomes. Second, by generating a sense of value and trust by the population. And third, a high quality health system also has to be able to change. As I often say in my work and in my talks, a health system is not a pile of bricks. We need to shift from that perception and think about how do health systems as social institutions change. All right. The urgency of this quest for high quality health systems is underpinned by the data in this slide, where we found, this is focusing in 160 low and middle income countries, but the same analysis has been done within Europe and other settings, basically assessing 63 conditions that we know are amenable to healthcare and asking ourselves the question, how many deaths occurred in those conditions that should not have occurred due to those causes. And we found that 8.6 million people die from treatable conditions. And furthermore, although sometimes our image is that in low and middle income countries, access is a major issue, we found that poor quality of care is an even bigger issue already. So as those systems have developed, they have prioritized contact over outcome. And what this slide is showing is that this isn't just an issue in the traditional, perhaps, conditions that we might associate with low and middle income settings. We often think of these as being infectious diseases and maternal child health, but I will just point you to the first bar here, and cardiovascular disease represents the largest contribution to lives lost due to conditions that are amenable to the health system. And, you know, we're starting to turn the lens on ourselves in high-income countries quite a bit, of course, and the issue of quality and amenable mortality is very pertinent in all countries. I want to share with you these data here that were developed by colleagues in Seattle that look at what's called the HAC index on the y-axis, and this is simply an index of mortality for conditions that are amenable to healthcare across the life course. So you see the age groups along the x-axis. And what I want to draw your attention to is the role or the position of the United States, which is the dashed line at the bottom. As is perhaps not surprising, we typically underperform, considering especially our huge resources that are spent. So you can see the United States trailing other high-income regions. Amenable mortality across a number of age groups. Where we do very well in the United States is for older adults, where we have better survival. but we really have a lot to learn and a lot of work to do at the earlier ages. And I'm showing this measure because I think it's an important summative measure of health system quality. All right, so let's get a little bit into the theory and a little bit into the measurement. We defined a framework for a high-quality health system, and the framework, of course, identifies foundations of every healthcare system. That includes critically the population, understanding the needs and the expectations of the population, understanding the governance frameworks of that system, the platforms, the workforce, and the tools. So those are very standard in a way, maybe elements that we all look at when we understand performance. However, where we wanted to focus attention in this commission was on the top part of the framework, which is what do those systems generate for users? What do we see in terms of the competence of the care, the competence of the system, user experience, and then, of course, the impacts, the health impacts, the confidence impacts, and the economic benefits. So just dive a little bit into these processes, because I think this is something where we really can improve our measurement and improve the use of data to give us a signal of performance in the health system. The first point is around competent care, which is simply asking, do the providers know what to do? Is the assessment systematic enough? Is the diagnosis correct? Is the treatment and referral appropriate? But competent systems are a much more difficult domain. And these really refer to the items here: safety, prevention, and detection, continuity, timeliness. Let me just really put a huge emphasis on timeliness. So much of healthcare is lost. So much of health is lost when healthcare is too slow. Population health management, that requires more than an extremely competent nurse or doctor. That requires a well-functioning system. And then lastly, user experience. And here, I think everyone probably in the room would agree, this is a critical dimension of performance. I would just divide this into two areas: one of respect, making sure that we're truly respecting people who come to us vulnerable because they're ill. And secondly, the basic customer service elements, that people are not treated worse than they would be at another service location. So let's get into specifics about how we might unlock high-quality health systems and how they might function for non-communicable diseases. And I focus here on NCDs because it is striking to me that this is one of the connection points in the health research agendas between high, middle, and low-income countries. This is a pressing problem in every country. It is Canada that has the honor of having the best control rate for hypertension globally right now, at 52% of people with hypertension being controlled. And what I see in my work is a large swath of countries, including well-resourced economies, trailing far, far behind that at even half that rate of control. And yet we know this is the largest modifiable factor for cardiovascular disease, one of the main killers of populations. So what I want to talk about is four actions, four approaches to thinking about health system value for NCDs. The first is assessing system competence, so diagnostics. And secondly is identifying the failure points in the system. And the third and fourth really have to do with what do we do about this: redesigning service delivery and really ramping up the quality and the size of research in this space. Okay, so the first point here is that we can't, we can't improve if we do not understand where the health system is losing. I'm sure most of you in the room are familiar with the use of care cascades across the continuum of care. But to me, that is a vital measure, diagnostic measure of whether a health system is keeping up with the needs of the population. Simply put, each bar represents the proportion of the population that is successfully completing that stage of the treatment. This treatment, the care cascade, can be applied to any condition that requires repeated contacts with the health system, and is particularly essential in fragmented systems where people might be using different sources of care for different needs. So the question I would have to the experts in the room is, do we have a data infrastructure that can give us this kind of a care cascade, sort of starting with saying 100 people have hypertension, how many of them are diagnosed, how many of them are treated, and then how many of them are controlled and avoiding complications? I think that is a clear imperative. Beyond that, and what we can see here, and this is an example that I draw here from Belgium, but just showing you that it is doable in systems that combine both public and private provision, and very much applicable, but again, has a specific demand for collaboration and coherence across different data systems. The second question I would ask is, what are the failure points? Maybe we see that number of the population or percentage of the population are diagnosed but not treated. I was in a conversation with a senior official in the Indian Ministry of Health recently who said, why am I screening everyone for diabetes and for hypertension, and yet I'm really not seeing a higher life expectancy in this group? So why is screening the last point in the cascade in a way? And what we're showing here is a new tool that we're developing that really is borrowing from the idea of patient registries. This one is a e-cohort. It's called the e-cohort, in which, for example, individuals with hypertension would be recruited upon contact with the health system and then followed over time largely with phone follow-ups to understand issues such as care continuity, integration, the care-seeking patterns. Do we know where our patients go? What are all the different sources of advice? And be able to connect the user-reported, patient-reported measures with clinical measures from the patient's chart. Okay. So the third point here is, what do we do when we identify failure points in the healthcare system and where value and health are lost? And that, I think, leads us to redesigning service delivery. And we've done a lot of work on this with our research team in the area of maternal newborn health, and increasingly working in the area of primary health care, which is really to ask this question: why is primary care so popular with experts and not so popular with the population in many settings? Not all settings, but in many settings. Also, why is it that we theoretically think it can treat 80% of undifferentiated conditions that come forward to it, and yet we're seeing huge burdens on hospitals and specialist care? So the first question here is, how do we reorganize care models to maximize health confidence and not just contacts, right? Not just contacts. And I'm sharing a couple of visuals here on this slide that look at the way that this is a particularly designed for India, but in which community informants and community workers can be used to promote screening, and health centers and wellness clinics can be tasked with the majority of management of some of these conditions early on, with a specific connection with hospitals. I also cite here, with a brief blurb, a recent interesting study from the United States that suggests that about 42% of primary care consultations could be delivered by telehealth. Now, I say this with some caution, because I'm actually a bit of a skeptic about the ability of telehealth to substitute for an ineffective health system. I think we should all avoid the temptation of thinking we'll just put everything online or be texting our patients. I think physicians in the room would probably agree with me that that's going to have limited impact in the absence of larger system redesign in which the telehealth is one component. Which brings me to ways that we can understand how to redesign health systems. What do we need to do? The first step is to understand users and communities. What are people's preferences and experiences? Where do they go? Why is it that people are not seeking care even after a diagnosis? So really working with the patients and users in particular. But then I think the question of what is feasible actually inside the health system, that answer will come from the folks in the middle section here, the government and policymakers, health system managers, providers. And I heard in the previous panel that we had an insurance executive. Insurance companies are absolutely vital. Not only do they have data, they share the interests of all of us in managing health in the most effective and efficient way. So all of these folks need to come in and say, look, what is possible within the current system, potentially with some productive additions, but how do we reorganize basically care models to produce people-centered primary care? And what I want to challenge all of us in the room with is that we need to actually demand better research. I think most folks in this room at this gathering are not necessarily researchers first and foremost. You are You are policymakers, you are managers, you are decision makers. But I would argue to you that you should be demanding better research from folks like me, who are full-time researchers in this space. We need to improve the focus and the scale of implementation science in particular. Nobody needs to ask the question whether atenolol reduces blood pressure. That's not the question at issue. The question is, how do we scale up interventions? Our team did a systematic review of implementation science on non-communicable diseases, and we found that there was a major distortions in the science that is produced on implementation strategies, ways that health systems can take up interventions at large scale. Particularly, we found, for example, that fewer than 15% of studies studied large-scale implementation. We love pilots, and we need to get away from pilots if we hope to have population-level health impact. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that most of the studies are really targeting what I call toy interventions, little tweaks. You know, let's add an app here. Let's add a reminder for this provider. Let's put some guidelines up on the clinic walls. Let's change this part of the EMR. Those types of interventions in our work are typically ineffective beyond the study period. They do not scale, and they are very difficult to integrate into the health system. So really, we need much larger studies and studies that focus upstream of the clinic on health system factors. Okay, and just to finish up by sharing a little bit about the work we are doing here with research and trying to sort of jump from this low-level, small-scale research to much larger studies that are going to inform health systems across countries. So I direct the Quest network, which is working with a number of centers that are in that middle circle here in Switzerland and around the world in Latin America, India, Kenya, Ethiopia, as well as a number of partners who are participating in one or more of our studies. And we are jointly pursuing several large research questions, particularly on the development of innovative measures of health system quality. And let me just say a word about those, which is here on this next slide. So what are we working on? We really think of this unit as an R&D enterprise for health system quality improvement. Specifically, we've identified in the Lancet Commission major gaps in measurement. The first is, what do we know about the population and their assessment of health system performance? If health systems are truly to be people-centered, it is stunning how little we talk to people about them. And so we've developed over the last 3 years something called the People's Voice Survey, which provides a rapid assessment of health system performance from the perspective of the population. We have data right now from 14 countries, including a number of European countries, the US, Mexico, as well as low and middle income countries. We have a number of papers under review already to present this new tool and to analyze what we're finding. And I will just point out one really, I think, novel aspect of the People's Voice Survey. We explicitly ask for people's confidence in the health system. Will it serve me tomorrow if I develop a problem? How do we compare public and private healthcare delivery in my country? So a number of really important questions that haven't been asked systematically before. We also are developing the e-cohorts that I already mentioned to you to track longitudinal care quality, and that can be applied to any condition that requires chronic care. And we had a large body of work during COVID to understand health system resilience, whether systems were able to deal with non-COVID conditions during COVID. And on the improvement side, we are actively supporting policymakers and managers in a number of countries in co-developing and evaluating reorganization models, service delivery redesign models that optimize health outcomes rather than increasing contacts. So with that, let me pause here and thank you so much for having me. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It was a great presentation. I hope I will be able to see your slides afterwards as well. One of the online questions was, what do you think the key obstacles are for the next generation and next generation care for Actioner? How do you think it will become more patient-centered? Can you give us an opinion on that, what the main obstacle would be?
Okay, great. So I think we're in a challenging period post-COVID, in the sense that a number of countries are re-examining their health budgets and asking how much can be spent on healthcare after this emergency. To me, that will potentially limit investment in some of these novel ideas And I think that is then for us to determine, makes it all the more important to determine which ones of these will be effective. So I'm thinking that the opportunity here is to really test some ideas at sufficient scale before we try to make the pitch to policymakers to implement, because I think they're going to be skeptical about further health system spending for the upcoming few years.